The man with the silver star on his chest watched Katherine Zimmerman walk into the Dusty Rose saloon like she owned the place. And Lucas Owens knew right then that trouble was brewing faster than a summer storm over the desert. It was August 1878 in Shafter, Texas, a silver mining town that attracted desperate men and dangerous opportunities in equal measure, and Katherine had just walked straight into both. Lucas leaned against the wooden post outside the general store, his weathered hat pulled low, but his eyes sharp as he tracked the subtle movements happening around the saloon entrance. He had been a ranch hand for the better part of 5 years, drifting from job to job across West Texas, but he had learned to read men the way some people read books, and what he was reading now made his blood run cold. Katherine had come to Shafter 2 weeks ago, arriving on the afternoon stage with nothing but a worn leather bag and a determination that seemed to radiate from her like heat from the desert floor. She had taken a job as a bookkeeper for Samuel Pritchard, the man who owned the largest silver claim in the area, and Lucas had noticed her immediately. Not just because she was beautiful, with dark auburn hair that caught the sunlight like copper wire and green eyes that seemed to see right through the dust and grime of this rough town, but because she carried herself differently. She walked like someone who had survived something terrible and come out stronger for it. She was perhaps 23, he guessed, and he was 26, old enough to know better than to get involved but young enough to still believe in doing the right thing. Now, as he watched, Lucas saw what Katherine could not. 3 men had positioned themselves casually around the saloon's exits. Ned Holloway stood near the front door, pretending to roll a cigarette. Jacob Tate loitered by the side alley that led to the back entrance, examining his fingernails like he had nowhere else to be. And Frank Morrison had stationed himself across the street, his eyes fixed on the saloon's windows. These were not Pritchard's men. These were hired guns who worked for Clayton Vance, a claim jumper and worse, who had been circling Pritchard's operation like a vulture for months. Lucas had heard rumors that Vance believed Katherine had discovered something in the books, something that proved Pritchard's claim was richer than anyone knew, and Vance wanted that information before Pritchard could act on it. Lucas straightened, his hand instinctively checking the Colt revolver at his hip. He was not a gunfighter, never had been, but his father had taught him to shoot straight, and his years working cattle drives had taught him when to act fast. He crossed the dusty street with purposeful strides, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air thick and heavy, and sweat trickled down his back beneath his work shirt. He pushed through the saloon doors, the sudden dimness making him blink as his eyes adjusted. Katherine stood at the bar, speaking with Henry Dalton, the saloon owner, about settling Pritchard's account for the company's weekly purchases. She wore a simple blue cotton dress that looked too refined for this rough place, and her hair was pinned up neatly despite the oppressive heat. Lucas noticed how her fingers tapped nervously against the wooden bar, a small tell that suggested she sensed something was wrong even if she could not identify what. Lucas moved quickly, crossing to her side before anyone could react. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to come with me right now." She turned, her green eyes widening in surprise. They had spoken only twice before, brief exchanges about the weather and the condition of the roads, nothing that would explain this sudden familiarity. "Mr. Owens, I am in the middle of conducting business." "Your business can wait," he said, letting his gaze flick toward the door where Ned Holloway had just entered, his hand resting too casually on his gun belt. "There are men positioning to keep you from leaving. We need to go now." Katherine followed his gaze, and Lucas saw the exact moment understanding flooded her features. Her face paled slightly, but her jaw set with determination. "The back door," she whispered. "Already covered," Lucas replied. "Henry, you got a window in your storage room." The saloon owner, a grizzled man who had seen enough trouble to recognize it coming, nodded once. "Through there, past the kegs. Window faces the stable yard." Lucas placed his hand lightly on Catherine's elbow, guiding her away from the bar. He could feel the tension in her arm, the way her body wanted to bolt, but her mind kept her controlled. They moved through the narrow doorway into the back storage room, where the smell of whiskey and stale beer hung thick in the air. Behind them, Lucas heard Ned Holloway's voice calling out, "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Vance would like a word with you." "Keep moving," Lucas murmured, helping Katherine navigate between the stacked barrels and crates. The window was small, set high in the wall, but it was large enough. He boosted her up, his hand steadying her waist as she pulled herself through. Her dress caught on the rough wooden frame and he heard the fabric tear, but she did not hesitate, wriggling through and dropping down on the other side. Lucas followed, pulling himself up and through with practiced efficiency just as he heard boots pounding into the storage room behind him. He landed in the dusty yard beside Katherine and grabbed her hand. "Run," he said, and they ran. They sprinted across the stable yard, scattering chickens and startling a dog that barked furiously at their passing. Lucas pulled Katherine toward the livery stable where he had left his horse that morning. Behind them, he heard shouts and the sound of men scrambling. They burst into the stable's dim interior and Lucas headed straight for his bay gelding, a solid ranch horse named Copper who had carried him through worse situations than this. "Can you ride?" he asked Katherine, already untying the reins. "Yes," she said breathlessly. "My father raised horses in Missouri before he died." Lucas swung into the saddle and reached down, pulling Katherine up behind him in one smooth motion. She wrapped her arms around his waist without hesitation, and he felt the rapid beat of her heart against his back. He kicked Copper into motion, bursting out of the stable just as Jacob Tate rounded the corner. The man reached for his gun, but Lucas was faster, guiding Copper straight at him. Tate dove aside to avoid being trampled, cursing loudly as horse and riders thundered past. They raced down the back streets of Shafter, past adobe houses and weathered wooden structures, past surprised miners and merchants. Lucas guided Copper toward the northeastern edge of town, where the desert stretched out in endless waves of sand and scrub brush. The horse's hooves pounded a steady rhythm and Katherine held on tightly, her face pressed against his shoulder. He could hear pursuit behind them, at least 2 horses by the sound of it, maybe 3. "Where are we going?" Katherine shouted over the wind and the thunder of hooves. "I have a friend who owns a ranch about 15 miles north," Lucas called back. "We can get help there, figure out what to do next." They rode hard across the desert landscape, the afternoon sun beating down relentlessly. The terrain was unforgiving, all dust and rock and tough vegetation that clung to life through sheer stubbornness. Lucas knew this country, had worked it for years, and he used that knowledge now, guiding Copper along paths that would be harder for their pursuers to follow. They splashed through a shallow creek, then doubled back along a rocky outcrop that would hide their tracks. Katherine never complained, never asked him to slow down, just held on and trusted him to get them to safety. After an hour of hard riding, Lucas pulled Copper to a halt behind a cluster of boulders that offered both shade and concealment. The horse was breathing hard, his coat dark with sweat, and Lucas knew they needed to rest or risk running him into the ground. He dismounted and helped Katherine down, his hand spanning her waist. She stumbled slightly and he steadied her, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him. Her hair had come partially loose from its pins, falling in waves around her flushed face. "You saved my life back there." "We are not safe yet," Lucas said, though he found himself reluctant to release her. "Those men work for Clayton Vance. Do you know why he wants you?" Katherine moved away, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. "I found discrepancies in the mining records. Samuel Pritchard has been filing claims under different names, buying up land through false companies. The silver deposits are 3 times richer than he has reported to his investors. He is planning to declare bankruptcy, buy back the claims for nothing, and keep the entire fortune for himself." Lucas let out a low whistle. "That is the kind of secret men kill for." "I know," Katherine said quietly. "I confronted Mr. Pritchard yesterday, told him I would have to report the fraud to the authorities. He smiled and told me I was free to do so, that I should take the afternoon to think about it carefully. I thought he was going to bribe me or threaten me, but instead, he just let me leave. I should have known it was too easy." "He told Vance," Lucas said, understanding dawning. "Vance must be one of the fake investors. They want you before you can talk to the sheriff." "The sheriff is in Pritchard's pocket," Katherine said bitterly. "Half the town is. That is why I was trying to figure out how to get to Fort Davis, where the army could protect me while I contacted the territorial authorities." Lucas checked the horizon, seeing no sign of pursuit for the moment. "My friend Thomas Randolph owns a ranch near the Chinati Mountains. He is honest, and he has enough men to keep us safe until we can figure this out. But we need to keep moving." They rode on as the afternoon wore into evening, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and purple as the sun descended toward the horizon. The desert heat slowly released its grip, replaced by a cooling breeze that carried the scent of sage and creosote. Lucas kept Copper to a steady pace, conserving the horse's energy while still covering ground. Katherine sat behind him, her arms around his waist, and he found himself acutely conscious of every place their bodies touched. She felt right there, like she belonged, and that thought unsettled him more than the danger they had just escaped. They talked as they rode, their voices low and intimate in the growing darkness. Katherine told him about growing up in Missouri, about her father's horse farm, and how they had lost everything when disease swept through the herd. She spoke of her mother's death from consumption, and her father's grief that had driven him to drink, until he followed his wife into the grave. She had come to Texas seeking a fresh start, hoping to use her head for numbers to build a new life. Her voice carried pain and resilience in equal measure, and Lucas found himself wanting to protect that strength, to give her the safety she needed to truly start again. Lucas shared his own story, though it felt smaller by comparison. He had grown up on a ranch in the hill country, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family was still there, working the land they had held for 2 generations, but Lucas had always felt the pull of something more. He had left at 18, working his way across Texas, learning the land and the people. He had been saving money, planning to start his own small spread somewhere, though that dream had always felt distant and hazy. As he spoke, Katherine's hands tightened slightly on his waist, a small gesture of understanding that made his chest feel tight. They reached Thomas Randolph's ranch just after full dark, the buildings materializing out of the night like solid shadows. Dogs barked announcing their arrival, and lanterns appeared in windows. Thomas himself emerged from the main house, a tall man in his 40s with a weathered face and cautious eyes. Those eyes widened when he recognized Lucas. "Luke Owens, what the hell brings you to my door at this hour?" Thomas called out. Lucas dismounted and helped Katherine down once more. "Trouble, Tom, the kind that needs friends and guns." Thomas's expression grew serious. He took in Katherine's torn dress and exhausted face, Lucas's own trail-worn appearance, and he nodded once. "Come inside. Maria will get you both food and water, then you can tell me everything." Over a meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, Lucas and Katherine explained the situation. Thomas listened carefully, his wife Maria hovering nearby, her face creased with concern. When they finished, Thomas leaned back in his chair and stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Pritchard is a snake, always has been," Thomas said, "but he is a careful snake. If you can prove what he has done, it will shake this whole region. Half the mining operations around Shafter are tied to him in one way or another." "That is why Katherine needs to get to Fort Davis," Lucas said. "The Army can protect her while she testifies." "Fort Davis is 4 days' ride from here," Thomas pointed out. "Vance will have men watching the roads." "Hell, he probably has men heading this way right now, checking with everyone who knows you." Katherine set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. "I will not hide while innocent investors lose everything. I have the documents. I memorized the account numbers and discrepancies. I can prove what Pritchard has done, but only if I survive long enough to do it." Maria spoke up for the first time, her accented voice firm. "She stays here tonight. Tomorrow, we think clearly about what to do." Lucas met Katherine's eyes across the table and saw the fear there, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. He also saw something else, a spark of trust that made him sit up straighter. She was trusting him to keep her safe, and he would rather die than betray that trust. That night, Maria set Katherine up in a small bedroom off the main house, providing her with a clean dress and a basin of water to wash. Lucas bedded down in the bunkhouse with Thomas's ranch hands, but sleep eluded him. He lay on the narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment when he had first seen those men positioning themselves around the saloon. What if he had hesitated? What if he had told himself it was not his business? The thought of Katherine trapped, hurt, or worse, made his stomach clench with an emotion he was not ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Lucas found Katherine already awake, standing by the corral fence watching the horses. She had braided her hair simply and wore Maria's borrowed dress, a plain brown cotton that somehow made her eyes seem even greener. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. "I could not sleep," she said without turning around. "I kept thinking about all the people Pritchard is cheating, families who invested their savings hoping for a return. Some of them are probably barely getting by, counting on that money." "We will find a way to stop him," Lucas said, coming to stand beside her. "I promise you that." She turned to face him, and he saw tears shimmering in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You have no obligation to risk your life for a woman you have barely spoken to." Lucas considered the question, searching for the right words. "When I saw you walk into that saloon, saw those men setting their trap, I knew I could not walk away. Maybe because my mama raised me to help people who need it. Maybe because this country needs more folks willing to stand up to men like Pritchard and Vance. But honestly..." He paused, meeting her gaze steadily. "I think it is because from the first time I saw you, I wanted to know your story, and I cannot know your story if something happens to you." Katherine's breath caught, and a tear finally escaped, tracking down her cheek. Lucas reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away and brush the tear aside with his thumb. Her skin was soft beneath his calloused hand, and he felt her lean almost imperceptibly into his touch. "I am frightened," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you are also brave. You stood up to Pritchard even knowing it would put you in danger. That takes real courage." "Or stupidity," she said with a shaky laugh. "Sometimes the best kind of courage looks like stupidity to folks who do not have it," Lucas replied, Thomas interrupted them, calling from the house. "Luke, got a rider coming in. You better get up here." Lucas and Katherine hurried to the house, where Thomas stood on the porch with his rifle in hand. A single rider approached at a careful pace, his hands visible and empty of weapons. As he drew closer, Lucas recognized Deputy Martin Fletcher, one of the few lawmen in the area who had a reputation for honesty. Fletcher dismounted and nodded to Thomas, then turned his attention to Lucas and Katherine. "Miss Zimmerman, I am glad to see you safe. There is a story going around town that you were kidnapped by a drifter." "That is a lie," Katherine said firmly. "Mr. Owens saved me from men who intended to abduct me or worse. Deputy Fletcher, I have evidence of massive fraud being committed by Samuel Pritchard." Fletcher's weathered face grew thoughtful. "I had a feeling something like that was brewing. Miss Zimmerman, I am going to be straight with you. Sheriff Davis is bought and paid for by Pritchard. If you come back to Shafter, you will be arrested or disappeared before you can get your story out. But I know a federal marshal named James Crawford. He is in Alpine right now, investigating rumors of land fraud across the region. If you could get to him, he would have the authority and the integrity to act on your information." "Alpine is west of here," Thomas said. "That is 2 days hard riding, maybe 3 at a safer pace." "Can you get word to Marshal Crawford?" Lucas asked. "Tell him to meet us somewhere between here and Alpine." Fletcher considered this. "There is an old way station at Shenega Creek about a day's ride from here. It has been abandoned for years, but the structure is still sound. I could get word to Crawford to meet you there in 2 days' time. That gives you time to travel carefully and him time to get there without raising suspicions." "Why are you helping us?" Katherine asked quietly. "If Pritchard owns the sheriff, you must be taking a huge risk." Fletcher smiled grimly. "I became a lawman because I believe in justice, Miss Zimmerman. Men like Pritchard make a mockery of everything a badge is supposed to stand for. Besides, my sister invested her widow's pension in one of Pritchard's schemes. I would like to see her get that money back." They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Thomas supplied them with provisions, a better horse for Katherine, and a spare rifle. Maria packed food that would keep in the heat and filled canteens with fresh water. As the sun began its descent, turning the western sky to flame, Lucas and Katherine prepared to depart. Maria pulled Katherine aside, speaking to her in low tones. Lucas could not hear the words, but he saw Katherine nod and embrace the older woman. When Katherine returned to his side, her cheeks were flushed, but she smiled at him with something that looked like hope. They rode out as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and blue, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Lucas had decided they would travel at night when it was cooler and they would be harder to spot, then rest during the hottest part of the day. It would be slower, but safer for both them and the horses. As they rode through the darkness, Katherine began to sing softly, an old ballad her mother had taught her about a woman waiting for her love to return from sea. Her voice was sweet and clear, carrying across the empty landscape, and Lucas found himself profoundly moved by the loneliness and longing in the melody. When she finished, the silence seemed deeper than before. "That was beautiful," he said. "My mother sang it every night," Katherine replied. Even at the end, when she could barely breathe, she would hum it. I think it comforted her, remembering when she and my father were young and in love before life became so hard. "Do you think love is worth it?" Lucas asked, "knowing it can hurt so much when you lose it." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, the only sounds the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the distant cry of a coyote. "I think love is the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile," she finally said. "The pain of losing it just proves how real it was." I would rather hurt from loving and losing than never feel anything at all. Lucas turned in his saddle to look at her, riding beside him now on the dappled mare Thomas had loaned her. Starlight caught in her hair and outlined her face in silver, and Lucas felt something shift in his chest, a lock clicking open on a door he had kept closed for too long. "Katherine," he said, then stopped, not sure how to continue. She met his eyes, and even in the darkness, he could see the understanding there. "Lucas," she said softly, "let us get through this first. Let us make sure we both survive. Then we can talk about what is happening between us." He nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words even as everything in him wanted to pull her close and tell her exactly what he was feeling. Instead, he turned his attention back to the trail, to keeping them safe, to getting her to that meeting with the marshal. They traveled through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and stretch their own aching muscles. The desert at night was a different world, cooler and almost peaceful, full of sounds and movements invisible during the harsh light of day. Lucas pointed out constellations, teaching Katherine the names his father had taught him. She told him about the stars over Missouri, how different they seemed from the same sky viewed through Texas air. As dawn approached, they found shelter in a shallow cave formed by an overhang of rock. It was not much, but it provided shade from the coming sun and concealment from anyone who might be searching for them. They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that could draw attention, and shared dried beef and hard biscuits from their supplies. Katherine sat with her back against the rock wall, exhaustion finally showing in the lines around her eyes and mouth. Lucas settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Tell me about your dream," she said. "The ranch you want to start." Lucas felt surprise and pleasure that she had remembered that detail from their conversation. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Maybe a couple 100 acres somewhere with good water and grass, enough to run a modest herd, maybe breed horses on the side. A house, not big but solid, the kind that would last, room for a family eventually." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said wistfully. "A place to build something real, something lasting." "What about you?" Lucas asked. "What did you dream about before all this happened?" Katherine smiled sadly. "I wanted to open my own business, a bookkeeping and accounting firm. I am good with numbers, I always have been, and I thought I could help people manage their finances, make sure they were not being cheated. I wanted to be independent, to prove I could make my own way." She laughed softly. "I suppose I am getting that independence, just not how I imagined." "You will get your business," Lucas said with conviction. "After we meet with the marshal, after Pritchard is brought to justice, you will have proven yourself as someone who can be trusted with important financial matters. People will seek you out, maybe," Katherine said, "if we survive." She leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that made Lucas's heart race. "Lucas, if something happens to me, you need to make sure the marshal gets the information. The account numbers are sewn into the hem of my dress, and I wrote down everything I could remember in the notebook in my bag. Promise me you will make sure the truth comes out." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Lucas said fiercely. "I will not let it." "You cannot promise that," she said gently. "But I need to know that this meant something, that the risk was worth it." Lucas shifted so he could look at her directly. "Katherine, listen to me. We are going to make it to that meeting. You are going to testify, and Pritchard is going to pay for what he has done. And then you and I are going to have a long conversation about what comes next for both of us. That is what is going to happen." She searched his face, and whatever she saw there made her eyes soften. "You really believe that?" "With everything I have," he said. Katherine reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough cheek. "I am starting to believe it too," she whispered. Lucas closed the distance between them, kissing her softly, carefully, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her hand sliding around to the back of his neck. The kiss deepened, becoming something desperate and tender at the same time, a promise and a plea wrapped together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it is crazy, we barely know each other, but I cannot pretend I do not feel it." "It is not crazy," Katherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "I feel it too. From the moment you came to me in that saloon, from the moment you put yourself at risk for me, I felt it. Lucas, I am terrified of what is happening, but I am more terrified of losing you before we even have a chance to see what this could be." They spent the day in that cave, talking and dozing in turns, one always keeping watch while the other rested. They shared stories from their childhoods, dreams for the future, fears about what lay ahead. Lucas learned that Katherine had a fierce love of reading, that she had taught herself advanced mathematics from borrowed books, that she could ride any horse ever born but was terrified of snakes. Katherine learned that Lucas had a gift for tracking, that he had once wanted to be a teacher before life led him to ranching, that he wrote poetry in a battered journal he carried in his saddlebag, though he had never shown anyone. As evening approached and they prepared to ride again, Lucas felt like he had known Katherine for years rather than days. She had become essential to him in a way he could not fully articulate, as necessary as air and water. The thought of her in danger made his blood run cold, but the thought of a future with her made everything seem possible. They traveled through another night, making good time across the rough country. Lucas kept them away from established trails, using old paths he remembered from previous jobs in the area. Near midnight, they stopped at a small spring to water the horses and refill their canteens. The desert around them was alive with night sounds, insects singing and small animals rustling through the brush. Katherine knelt by the spring, splashing cool water on her face and neck. Lucas stood watch, his hand never far from his revolver, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of threat. It was Katherine who spotted the campfire in the distance, a small orange glow against the black horizon. "Lucas," she said quietly, pointing. He saw it immediately, perhaps 2 miles away to the south, too far to be a direct threat but close enough to be worrying. "Could be anyone," he said. "Miners, travelers, cowboys, or men looking for us," Katherine finished. They decided to give the camp a wide berth, angling north before turning back west toward their destination. It cost them time but seemed the safer choice. They rode in tense silence, every sound making them jump, every shadow a potential threat. Near dawn, exhausted and on edge, they finally reached the old way station at Shenega Creek. The building was exactly as Fletcher had described, weathered but intact, a stone structure that had once served travelers on the old stage route before the road shifted south. The creek beside it was little more than a trickle this time of year, but it was water, and the cottonwoods growing along its banks provided shade. Lucas and Katherine approached cautiously, checking for any signs of recent occupation. Finding none, they led the horses inside the old stable and began to make camp in the main building. "We are early," Lucas said, checking the position of the sun. "Fletcher said 2 days. We made it in 1.5. "Better early than late," Katherine said, sinking down against the wall. She looked exhausted, her borrowed dress dusty and stained with sweat, her face drawn with fatigue. But she also looked determined, her back straight and her eyes alert. They spent that day and night waiting, taking turns sleeping and keeping watch. Lucas used the time to clean his weapons and check their supplies. Katherine reviewed her notes, making sure she had every detail clear in her mind for when the marshal arrived. They talked less than they had before, both feeling the weight of what was coming, the final sprint toward either safety or disaster. On the afternoon of the second day, Lucas spotted riders approaching from the west. He tensed, bringing his rifle to bear, then relaxed as he recognized Deputy Fletcher's lanky form. The deputy was accompanied by two other men, one wearing a federal marshal's badge that caught the sunlight. Lucas and Katherine emerged from the way station as the riders dismounted. Marshal James Crawford was a solid man in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He studied Katherine and Lucas carefully, then extended his hand. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Owens, Deputy Fletcher has told me quite a story. I am here to hear yours." They spent the next hour going over everything, Katherine providing dates and figures while Lucas described the attempted abduction and their flight from Shafter. Marshal Crawford took notes, asked pointed questions, and examined the documents Katherine had brought. His expression grew increasingly grim as the scope of Pritchard's fraud became clear. "This is bigger than I thought," Crawford said finally. "We are talking about fraud on a scale that could affect mining operations across 3 counties. Miss Zimmerman, your testimony and these documents are enough for me to arrest Pritchard and launch a full investigation, but I need to know you are willing to stand up in court and repeat all of this under oath." "I am," Katherine said without hesitation. "Those investors deserve justice." Crawford nodded approvingly. "I will need to take you into protective custody until the trial. Mr. Owens, I appreciate everything you have done, but from here, this is a matter for federal authorities." Lucas felt Katherine stiffen beside him, and he reached out to take her hand. "With respect, Marshal, where Katherine goes, I go, at least until she is somewhere genuinely safe." Crawford studied them both, his eyes moving from their joined hands to their faces. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I see. Well, I suppose I could use a guide who knows this country. Mr. Owens, if you are willing to be deputized temporarily, you can accompany us to Fort Davis where Miss Zimmerman will be under Army protection until the trial." "I am willing," Lucas said immediately. The marshal deputized Lucas on the spot, and they prepared to ride out. Fletcher would return to Shafter to keep an eye on Pritchard and report any attempt to flee. Crawford's other deputy, a quiet man named Wilson, would ride with them to Fort Davis. Before they left, Fletcher pulled Lucas aside. "You have done a good thing here, Owens," the deputy said. "Miss Zimmerman is lucky you were paying attention that day." "I am the lucky one," Lucas replied, meaning it absolutely. The journey to Fort Davis took 3 days, traveling openly now with the marshal's authority protecting them. Katherine seemed to relax incrementally with each mile, though she still jumped at unexpected sounds and scanned the horizon constantly. Lucas stayed close to her, and at night when they camped, he made sure his bedroll was near enough that she could call out if she needed him. On the second night, when Crawford and Wilson had both fallen asleep, Katherine moved from her blankets to sit beside Lucas where he kept watch. "I keep thinking about what happens after," she said quietly. "After the trial, after everything is settled, where do we go from here?" Lucas put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close against the cool night air. "I have been thinking about that too. I have enough saved up to make a down payment on some land. Nothing fancy, but a start. I thought maybe you could help me run it, keep the books, make sure I do not make stupid decisions." Katherine laughed softly. "Are you asking me to be your business partner, Lucas Owens?" "I am asking you to be a lot more than that," he said seriously. "Katherine, I know this has all happened fast, and I know we have been through something intense that might be making us feel things we would not normally feel. But I also know that I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to build something with you, not just a ranch but a life. I want to give you the stability you deserve, the safety to pursue your dreams, and I want to do it together." Katherine turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face though she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. I want that too, Lucas. I want it so much it scares me." He kissed her then, under the stars, with the desert wind whispering through the sage and the horses shifting quietly nearby. It was a kiss that promised everything, that sealed something between them that felt as permanent as the mountains on the horizon. When they finally reached Fort Davis, the Army commander, Colonel Harrison, assured them that Katherine would be completely safe within the fort's walls. He assigned her a private room in the officers' quarters and posted guards. Marshal Crawford began preparing his case, sending telegrams to territorial authorities and gathering additional witnesses. Lucas stayed at the fort, officially still a deputy, though his duties mostly consisted of being near Katherine. They spent long hours talking, planning, dreaming about the future they would build together once this ordeal was finally behind them. Lucas wrote to his family, telling them he had met someone remarkable and to expect a letter soon about a wedding. Katherine helped Crawford organize his evidence, her mathematical mind perfectly suited to presenting the complex fraud in a way that judges and juries could understand. The trial took place 6 weeks later in the territorial court in El Paso. Pritchard was arrested before he could flee, and Clayton Vance was picked up trying to cross into Mexico. The courtroom was packed with investors who had been defrauded. Newspapers sent reporters from as far as San Antonio, and the judge made it clear he would tolerate no disruptions. Katherine testified for an entire day, walking the court through every fraudulent transaction, every fake company, every false claim. She was brilliant and unshakable, and when the defense attorney tried to rattle her with aggressive questions, she calmly demolished his arguments with facts and figures. Lucas sat in the front row, and every time she looked at him, he tried to pour all his support and love into his expression. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Pritchard was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Vance received 15 years. The judge ordered all of Pritchard's assets seized and distributed back to the defrauded investors. It was a complete victory, and when the verdict was read, Katherine collapsed into Lucas's arms, sobbing with relief. That evening, as the sun set over El Paso, Lucas took Katherine to the small church near their hotel. The priest, an elderly man who had attended the trial and been moved by Katherine's courage, agreed to marry them despite the short notice. Marshal Crawford stood as Lucas's witness, and a kind woman from the hotel stood for Katherine. It was simple and quick, but when Lucas slipped a plain gold band onto Katherine's finger and she looked up at him with joy blazing in her green eyes, it felt like the most important moment of his entire life. "I love you," he said, the words still feeling new and urgent. "I love you too," she replied. "Always." They stayed in El Paso for another week, enjoying the luxury of safety and privacy in a small hotel while they made plans for their future. Lucas finalized the purchase of a 200-acre ranch near the Guadalupe Mountains, a beautiful piece of land with a creek and good grass. Katherine received a reward from the territorial governor for her role in exposing the fraud, enough money to furnish their future home and help stock the ranch. She also received several letters from businessmen and investors asking to hire her services, the beginning of the accounting business she had always dreamed of. When they finally traveled to see their new ranch, arriving in the spring of 1879, Katherine stood in the middle of their land and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. The house Lucas had described stood on a small rise, a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch and a view that stretched for miles. It needed work, but it was solid, built to last. "It is perfect," she said, and Lucas heard the wonder in her voice. They threw themselves into building their life together. Lucas worked the ranch, building his herd slowly and carefully, while Katherine divided her time between helping him and taking on bookkeeping clients from nearby towns. She had a gift for the work and a reputation for absolute integrity, and her business grew steadily. They were busy, often exhausted, but happy in a deep, fundamental way that made all the hard work worthwhile. 2 years after they married, Katherine gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after the friend whose help had saved their lives. The boy had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair, and Lucas thought he had never seen anything more perfect than his wife holding their child. 3 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Maria after the woman who had sheltered them. Katherine joked that they were naming their children after their origin story, and Lucas did not disagree. Those people had been part of the beginning of their great love, and it seemed right to honor that. Lucas never went back to drifting. He had found something worth staying for, worth building for. The ranch prospered, not making them rich but providing a solid, comfortable living. Katherine's business grew to the point where she had to hire an assistant, a young woman from town whom she trained carefully. They were respected in their community, known for their honesty and their willingness to help neighbors in need. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the desert stars blazed overhead, Lucas and Katherine would sit on their porch and remember those desperate days running from danger. It felt like another lifetime, like it had happened to different people, but Lucas knew those days had forged them into who they were. The fear and danger had stripped away everything superficial, letting them see each other clearly, and what they had seen was worth building a life around. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked Katherine one such evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "The danger, the fear, everything you went through." Katherine leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, completely comfortable in a way that still made his heart swell. "Not for a second," she said, "because it led me to you, because it showed me what I was capable of, because it gave us this." She gestured at their home, their land, the life they had built. "I would go through it all again if this was the result." "I saw you walk into that saloon," Lucas said, "and I knew trouble was coming. But Katherine, you were the best trouble I ever found." She laughed, tilting her face up to kiss him. "And you were my unlikely hero, the cowboy who noticed when no one else did, who got me out before the trap closed." They sat together as night fell, two people who had found each other in the chaos of the Wild West and chosen to hold on. Their children slept safely inside the house they had built together. Their land stretched around them, a piece of Texas that belonged to them. The dangers they had faced were years in the past, transformed into a story they would one day tell their grandchildren. Years continued to pass, and their family grew and thrived. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with the horses, showing his mother's mathematical precision in how he approached training. Maria was spirited and bold, fearless in a way that reminded Lucas of Katherine facing down Pritchard with nothing but her integrity and courage. 2 more children followed, another son and daughter, rounding out their family to 4. Katherine's accounting business became one of the most respected in the region. She consulted on major business deals, helped families manage inheritances, and taught young women the skills they needed to support themselves. She never forgot what it was like to be alone and frightened, and she made a point of helping widows and single women navigate the financial complexities of their lives. Lucas was endlessly proud of her, watching her confidence grow as her reputation spread. The ranch also flourished under Lucas's careful management. He developed a reputation for breeding excellent working horses, combining his natural skill with animals with Katherine's head for business. Together, they created something sustainable and successful. They were never the richest family in the area, but they were comfortable, secure, and respected. Lucas stayed in touch with Thomas Randolph and Deputy Fletcher over the years. Fletcher eventually became sheriff after the corrupt Davis was driven out of office, and he ran an honest department that served the people rather than the powerful. Thomas remained a good friend, and their families visited back and forth regularly. Lucas never forgot the debt he owed to those who had helped when help was desperately needed, and he made sure his own children understood the importance of standing up for others. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas took Katherine back to El Paso, to the small church where they had married. The old priest had passed away, but the building remained, and they stood in the same spot where they had exchanged their vows. Lucas pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal an emerald ring, the stone the exact shade of Katherine's eyes. "I have been saving for this," he said. "I wanted to give you something beautiful, something that shows how precious you are to me." Katherine's eyes filled with tears as he slipped the ring onto her finger beside the simple gold band she had worn for 10 years. "Lucas, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a partnership that makes me better than I could ever be alone. This ring is beautiful, but you are my true treasure." They renewed their vows that day, speaking the same words they had spoken a decade earlier, but with the added weight of everything they had experienced together. The young couple who had fled across the desert had become a formidable partnership, a marriage that had weathered challenges and emerged stronger for them. As they grew older, Lucas and Katherine watched their children become adults and start families of their own. Thomas took over the horse breeding operation, expanding it in ways his father had never imagined. Maria married a lawyer and opened her own business in San Antonio, becoming a prominent advocate for reform. Their younger children found their own paths, but all of them carried the values their parents had instilled through example more than words. Lucas Gray, haired and weathered but still strong, still the man who had recognized danger in time to act. Katherine aged like fine wine, her beauty changing but never diminishing, her mind as sharp as ever. They took up positions on their porch each evening, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. Their grandchildren played in the yard, and Lucas often told them the story of how he had met their grandmother. "I saw men positioning themselves to trap her," he would say, his voice still steady despite his years. "And I knew I could not let that happen. So I got her out before the trap closed, and she has been stuck with me ever since." Katherine would laugh and add her own details, making sure the grandchildren understood that their grandfather had been her hero but also her partner, that he had saved her, but she had saved him right back by giving him something worth staying for. The children listened wide-eyed, entranced by the adventure and romance of it all. On their 40th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Lucas and Katherine sat together under the same desert stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love. Lucas took his wife's hand, the one that still wore both the simple gold band and the emerald ring. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting me that day, for building this life with me, for being the best thing that ever happened to me." Katherine squeezed his hand, her grip still firm despite her age. "Thank you for noticing," she said. "Thank you for acting. Thank you for loving me so completely that I never doubted it, not once in 40 years." They had started with danger and desperate flight, with a trap closing and a narrow escape. They had built from that foundation something enduring and beautiful, a love that had sustained them through hard times and blessed them in good ones. The Wild West that had brought them together had been tamed over the decades, turned from frontier to settled land, but their love remained as fierce and true as it had been that first night in the desert. Lucas and Katherine lived to see their great-grandchildren, lived to celebrate more than 50 years of marriage. When Lucas finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 79, Katherine held his hand and told him one more time how he had been her unlikely hero, her partner, her great love. She followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine a world without him in it. Their children and grandchildren gathered to lay them to rest on a hill overlooking their ranch, where they could watch over the land they had built together for eternity. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, but also an inscription that summed up their remarkable story. He noticed, he acted, they loved. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose to hold onto each other against all odds. The story of Lucas and Katherine became family legend, told and retold, a reminder that courage comes in many forms and that true love can begin in the most unexpected moments. From a near-tragic encounter in a rough Texas mining town to a partnership that lasted more than half a century, they had lived a love story worthy of the Wild West that had forged them. They had faced down danger together, built dreams into reality together, and created a legacy that outlived them both. It was a love that began with Lucas noticing men positioning to block Katherine from leaving, getting her out before the trap closed, and it ended only when death finally separated them, decades later, still holding hands and still grateful for that first moment of recognition in Shafter, Texas, in the summer of 1878.